Senator DeMint.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank all the witnesses as well, as I really appreciate you being here. A very complex and interesting subject to consider. I know the United States wants to be a constructive part of the international community, and I know that's a lot of the motivation to work with other countries in a non-military way to work out differences around the world. I do think we have to recognize as we look at treaties like this that the U.S. does have a very different role than all of the other signatories to this, this treaty. Our role and responsibility in this world is very different than any other country, and the expectations of us are very different, and the need to act independently, as we have seen many times in the last decade, is very important not only to us but the world itself. I believe that was Reagan's philosophy. I've heard him quoted today. It's interesting, his diaries have come out, and he said on Tuesday, June 29th of 1982, decided in the National Security Council meeting, will not sign Law of Sea Treaty even without seabed mining provisions. And he wanted us to go along with the treaty, obviously, and work with the international community, but recognize the dangers of signing up to this. I think the question before us is, do we want to submit the United States to another international body? And I think as we consider it, we need to think of these other international bodies that we've been a part of. Certainly, if we look at the United Nations, the concern of the nation and many here in Congress continues to grow at their unwillingness to act in the best interest of the world, and particularly not in the best interest of the United States. Every member of the United Nations signs the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, including Cuba and North Korea and Iran. We know they don't follow that. But the United States follows the rules, which puts us at a distinct disadvantage whenever we sign a treaty with other countries that don't. The Kyoto Protocol, which we have fortunately not signed yet, those who've signed to it have not met any of their targets. Yet we know if the United States is a party of that, we will do everything we can. The attitude of the international community appears to be that if everyone cheats, they will too. We know the World Trade Organization, which is important to trade around the world. A number of our citizens feel, and we can see many examples, where the United States tries to follow the rules and are put at a distinct advantage to other countries that don't. And we can see clearly in the Law of the Sea Treaty, Russia is a party to the Law of the Sea Treaty. They signed up to it, but they didn't go to this authority to ask where their sovereignty reached. They planted a flag. Canada is part of this agreement as well. And if we think as a Congress that the members, the signatories to this sea treaty are going to vote in favor of the United States, we need to look at the list. Iran has an equal vote to us. So does Saudi Arabia, and a number of the countries that don't have our interest or have demonstrated they do not have the world's interest in their mind. Yet we're submitting ourselves to this. I know in theory that everything we're talking about is good, and it would work, but I'm astounded at the thought of legal predictability that you're talking about, legal certainty with an international community, when we have yet to see that demonstrated in any international community, that we can count on other nations to respond to a body like this with no enforcement authority. The theory is good, but I think it is unreasonable for us, as we look at the other bodies that we're a party of, to submit ourselves again to an international group. I think America and our fellow countrymen are deeply sensitive about it now. We saw that during the immigration debate. The emails and phone calls we got, a lot of them had nothing to do with immigration. They were concerned about our sovereignty, our borders. They were concerned about Congress not acting in their best interest and not really trusting us to act in the best interest. All of us get emails and phone calls about the North American Union that people are concerned about, or the NAFTA highway. And I would just contend to all of you, as we move forward with debating this is not a good time to bring something like this back up in front of the American people. I'm a little confused at the testimony today, because you've told us a number of times in a number of different ways that it's working beautifully right now. And you've told us at the same time that there are important military interests, yet this treaty will have no influence on our military activity around the world. And I'm just confused. We know there's already creeping jurisdiction within the authority of this treaty. We've seen that they claim jurisdiction on land pollution in Great Britain. And we know what happens when we turn authority over to a third party, that what we think is their mission will soon be greatly expanded all over the world to the disadvantage of the United States. If we look at the parties to this agreement, they will not vote, and have demonstrated in the United Nations and other bodies that they will not vote in the best interest of the United States. And so we need to consider jurisdiction. I would just like to ask, and I would start with you, Director Negroponte, how will this entity, this authority as it's called in the treaty, enforce their decisions? I mean, we know we're in Iraq today because the United Nations would not enforce their own resolutions, and the parties to the United Nations would not support us in that. How can they enforce? How are they going to enforce with Russia their flag on the bottom of the ocean, or Canada's claim, when these groups apparently do not even respect the treaty they've already signed up to? I would like you to think of that, and how can you say this international body is going to give us legal certainty? So just to start with those questions, please.
First of all, Senator, when we talk about the treaty, as Senator Lugar pointed out, despite the title of the convention, this is not a UN. It's not a UN body.
It is a new international.
It's a new agreement amongst the parties, and there are a lot of conventions of this kind where the parties agree to carry out certain activities. And I'm familiar, for example, with the Antarctic Treaty Convention, where we carry out a lot of constructive activities through agreement amongst the parties down there. That'd be my first point. Secondly, with regards to how do you enforce, well, with respect to this Russian claim, they symbolically planted the flag, but they're actually going through the process laid out in the convention by gathering the information that they need to justify their claim to the technical body that addresses the continental shelf beyond 200 miles, and that information is being studied by that commission. And that commission, which is a technical body, will have the responsibility of saying whether they think this claim is justified or not. And if they say it's not justified, Russia will still be entitled to make a claim, but it's not going to have the legal certainty, if you will, and the international recognition that comes with if you had the blessing of the commission. So that'd be one point. On the seabed authority, let's be clear. We're only talking about seabed activity beyond 200-mile jurisdiction if and when deep seabed mining activity takes place, which until this date it has not done. So